read that. So we don't go over the whole time. So we have 2 weeks worth of things we have to deliver and it allows you to work from home. But then we come back right after and do the rest. And we don't, and we come after Thanksgiving.
So if I could, there's some background noise coming through. And so if you could all please mute yourselves, I would help the rest of us be able to hear. Again, we didn't set up auto muting because I want to encourage people to either use the chat box for questions or I'll try to allow time for questions. But please do mute yourself. Thank you.
And put me on. Well, I don't know how to set up all these minutes.
I'm on a Zoom meeting until 10:30, Mandy. I think Stacy is too. Nope, I'm good. My mic is off.
So once again, good morning. It's 9:30, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Ken Bailey, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer at the OPI, and I'm also serving as the grant manager for the ESSER grant. Because I think this is a good time to catch up on some specific topics regarding ESSER. There's been a lot of things that we've published, and I know that MASBO did an excellent webinar also on both the ESSER and GEAR and education stabilization funds. So my purpose isn't to go back over everything with the ESSER fund, but to concentrate on some specific topics. So let me try to share my screen and get going. Let me first, though, at least on my screen up at the top left, Mindy Askelson is the assistant for this grant. And she was actually hired as part of the use of the administrative funds of the grant. So for those, as I've been working with school districts on approving budgets and questions and that kind of stuff, more and more frequently, I'm asking Mindy to help out with that stuff. And so she's an available resource to all of you who are working with the ESSER fund grant, especially in e-grants. So Mindy, say hello.
Let me unmute. Hello, everybody. It's nice to put faces to some names of people I've already been working with. So I'm glad to see everybody and just let everyone know that I'll be monitoring the chat box for questions and stuff.
Right? Okay, yes.
Okay, so I've got my screen up, but I didn't mean to do that. Please bear with me, I'm not really good at this. So let me now try to get this going. So just to check, is everyone seeing the ESSER review slide? Mindy?
I am.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are, Ken.
Okay. So again, this is just starting off, and the agenda for today that we're going to talk about is first of all, the equitable share calculation, hit some specific questions that have come up on allowable expenditures. And I actually added another topic this morning because of some recent things I've seen coming through on budget amendments. OPI monitoring of school districts, and then annual reporting, is the agenda. So we'll try and get through this. And as I said, I hope that we'll have plenty of time. I think I allowed more time than we need. So we'll try to answer any questions that you've got as we go through this. And again, I included a page for, the resources that we've got. And again, this slideshow will be posted on our website after we finish this, as well as a recording of this session.
On,
I put in some links that you'll be able to go to find this, including the OPI website, where you can either in the search tab at the main website search for ESSER, or this is the specific link. There's also at the Department of Education, information on this is at this website. And these have all been shared before. I don't think there's anything new here. And when you do go to our website, these are the main things that we have. So the original guidance that we published, the amount of money going to each school district is listed here. And then a segment on the funds that the codes that we established for receiving the funds at the school district and for expenditures. And on this listing of different documents, we're going to spend some time today on these last three, which have to do with equitable share. And I'll try and point these out and then come back to them as we go through this.
Sorry.
I also just want to touch base on the funding summary. Again, the $41 million that we got, and it's broken down into 90% allocated on the basis of Title I and 10% that's set aside. And down below, a little more information. On the allocation by Title I, we actually had some school districts that said they don't want the grant. So we have $9,411 that was originally assigned to those schools that we have to redistribute. And we haven't exactly figured out what we're going to do with that yet. Then down in the 10% set aside, how we've used that $4 million is, first of all, we awarded an amount to bring every school district up to at least $10,000. So that took 593. We gave grants to the Montana School for the Deaf and Blind and the Youth Academy. And then we did the related services grant of $3 million, of which a little over $2 million is going to school districts who are not members of co-ops. So for those districts to use. And then just under $1 million that went out to those districts that are members of co-ops. And that money was immediately passed through automatically without any need for accounting work on the district side to the co-ops. We are allowed by the grant to set aside 0.5% for administrative fees, or costs, I should say. And that is basically going to be used up with both paying for Mindy for the time that the grant is in effect, as well as all of the fees that we've incurred modifying e-grants to handle this grant. And the last thing is that, just so everyone knows, there's $309,000 that has not been committed yet, out of that total of $41 million.
Okay, so I am not hearing it on here. Let me see what I have set up.
So someone's talking. If there's a question, I'll take it, but if it's unintentional, please mute. So on equitable share, we went through this whole saga of the original guidance that was handed out, and then lawsuits, and intermediate steps of, well, let's do this until we see what the guidance is. And then finally, the department sent out guidance that we passed on to the school districts. But unfortunately, a requirement of that is that every school district that has equitable share has to recalculate it now. And because of the timing of this, we didn't have time to really put it back into e-grants. So we've asked everybody to complete a spreadsheet and file it with us, which we'll approve and say, so, okay, that's the equitable share. And an important part of this is that in the recalculation, if the amount that you calculate for equitable share is less than what you've already given out, the department in a letter that they sent basically said, if you've already given out more than the calculated equitable share, the department will not ask you to get the money back and or get the goods or services back. It will be okay to allow the private schools or homeschools to keep what's already been given to them. And in that equitable share, there's really two parts to it that you need to do. And the first is you have to choose a method for calculating the equitable share. And there's basically two options. The first is you could take the actual equitable share from your targeting step 4 from either your 2020 or 2021 consolidated ESEA application. That's the Title I application. But I note down here that if you had 0% on that application, and now for this grant you have participants, you can't say, well, it was 0%, so I'm not going to give anything out. If that's the case, you have to go to the second method. And again, you don't have to do the first one either. You can go to this and actually do a calculation using the count of private and public low-income kids, just like you do for Title I. And after you do that, after you've calculated the amount of money, the guidance that came out from the department said, so in terms of how you decide how much you give to each participant, you can either use, like Title I does, the low-income kid count, or you can use total enrollment. So again, an option that you've got in doing this. And I'm going to go back 2 slides before I go forward.
Ken,
Yes.
there is a question in the chat box. Do we have to do equitable share for both ESSER and ESSER related funds?
So you only have to do it once, but you have to include both the main ESSER fund and the ESSER related services grant in your calculation. And back when we first set up this grant and this idea of giving money to co-ops was put forward, we said that the equitable share responsibility would remain with the district that the award is given to rather than the co-ops, to avoid the issue of the co-ops then having to independently go out and contact all of the private entities in their area for deciding what to do with their money. So instead, the responsibility for providing equitable share from those funds remains with the district. And I'll show that in a second about how that works. But what I wanted to point out here is that, again, on the resources for, and the very last one, determining equitable share for private and home schools for the ESSER grant, is a detailed, steps in the process for doing this. And if you take the option of saying we're going to go out and read independently, look for the number of low-income kids and use that method for calculating, there's guidance that we put out that gives you all the different poverty measurement tools that you can use for doing this equitable share calculation. And there, again, this is all straight out of Title I methodology. And the last is that, again, what's shown here is this ESSER equitable share calculation template. And I'm going to go over that in a second. But that is the spreadsheet that actually you would use to calculate the equitable share. And this is a copy of a piece of the spreadsheet. I wanted to make sure it was big enough to show everyone. So the idea with this spreadsheet is that you fill, and when you open the spreadsheet, you will see there's a tab that has instructions in it. But I'm just going to show you here, the idea of the spreadsheet is that you only fill in those cells that are shaded. And so if you're, and as you can see in the title, if you're a school system who has a consolidated Title I application, you would fill in this top part. If you are a single school district, you would fill in this bottom part, because again, the related services grant was given out independently for both the elementary and high school. So again, you would put all this in, and it's this total dollar amount from either of these two sections that is used for determining what the equitable share is. It's the total of both the main grant and the related services grant. And if you remember in the last page, I said you have a choice. You can just use the percentage from your last consolidated Title I application. And over here, what I'm showing is we set that up so that if that's what you want to do and your equitable share was 1%, you would just fill it in right here. You would go into this cell and enter 0.01. And what that'll do is override this and make the equitable share calculation right there. And so when you do it that way, as soon as you fill this percentage in, you'll see that the grant amount that stays with the public schools and the equitable share for all of the private schools will be immediately calculated. If you leave this at 0, then you have to go back in and fill in the public school district low-income kids and fill in the bottom section. I only showed one row here, but there's many, where you would list all of the private schools, their total enrollment, and then your determination of low-income kids. And this spreadsheet will add the low-income kids up here and then do the calculation for you. So if you leave this at 0, it'll be calculated using this part. And if you put something in here, we'll override it and use that percentage. And you'll have this amount that goes to private schools. And then if you go to the second option here, if you're then going to allocate the money to private and home schools on the basis of total enrollment, you would just enter a Y here. And then it'll go through and calculate what then the participant rate, like per student, and then come down here and actually calculate the allocation to each entity, okay? If you leave it at no, what will happen is it will calculate this per participant rate on the basis of total number of low income kids. And again, then do the allocation to all of the entities. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions about what this spreadsheet is doing.
Yes, Ken, we have several questions. The first one is, do we have to do equitable share if we don't have any non-public students participating?
If the original application that you completed for ESSER showed that there were no private or homeschool kids, then you do not have to do the spreadsheet and send it in again, because the answer is still going to be 0. But if you do, in your original application, you did show that there were private homeschool participant or homeschool participants, then you do have to complete this spreadsheet and send it in to us. This will then become, a part of the application for the funds that we will keep as the document for this.
And then also too, to add to that, when we do our desk monitoring, that those documentation of those attempts to work with the private schools, we're going to be asking for verification of that. So just for people to know that. The next question is, we are part of the Great Divide Ed Services Co-op. They've also received the ESSER grant funds. could that affect or lessen our fees due to the GDES co-op?
So there's nothing in the ESSER grant that has any provision for changing the fees of a co-op with member schools. The money, the reason for doing this allocation on the basis of related services was because of a request to try and give some money to co-ops to specifically help with extra costs that were incurred because of the coronavirus. And it's the leeway is given to the co-op to decide how to spend those funds. Any decision about member fees for a co-op would be separate and would be based upon how, the negotiation or agreement is reached on fees currently.
Okay. The next question, does anyone have a follow-up to that, or should I go on to the next question? All right, I'll go on. We told our co-op about the new equitable share for related services was, and they told us they didn't care because they weren't going to provide any services to the private school. Whatever the private school wanted, we would actually have to pay for from our own piece. They would be paying it. That doesn't sound correct to me.
So I get the issue. Again, when we set the grant up, we did make the decision that the amount of equitable share would be the responsibility of the district as opposed to the co-op. And that the equitable share, the services or goods that are provided to the private school don't have to be broken down along the amounts of the two different grants. So there's not a requirement that any related services, types of services are provided to a private school. What we said from the beginning is that if the private schools are saying that part of their equitable share is that they would like special education types of services, that the school district could go to the co-op to request that they help provide it. I guess at the time that we did that, we had hoped that there would be a cooperative agreement as to how to do that. But again, we have set it up so that really is the case that the responsibility lies with the school district, and that for the co-op to provide those services to a private school is voluntary. Again, we had hoped that the co-ops would cooperate in that way because they are directly getting this money.
Any follow-up on that question? All right, I'll move on to the next one. Once we do the spreadsheet, when do we have to do a budget amendment?
So, the step is to send the spreadsheet into us to approve. And when that's done, then you are free to go ahead and do an amendment to your budget to reflect how you're going to actually spend the money. And I understand that there is a complication in this because, again, you may do this calculation and realize that you've already given out more than what the new calculation is in terms of goods and services, and that you don't intend to try to retrieve any of it. And if so, at that point, your budget amendment would be to show the amount dedicated to equitable services that reflects the actual amount that you're going to spend. So there is no deadline on when you have to revise your budget, but you should amend your budget certainly before you draw the cash to expend, if further cash is needed. And again, it's just as a note, as opposed to other grants, we've set up this grant so that there really is no deadline for amending your budget. We set it up in e-grants that out until, I think, July of 2022, you can amend your budget.
Can you use different methods for each private school, or do you have to apply one method to every private school?
Again, a lot of freedom is given to you to decide how to do that. And again, you have to agree with the private entity what's the best method for determining low-income kids at that entity. So, for example, I've seen what some schools have done is where they have information about low-income kids at some of the private schools, that they go ahead and use that data. And then if they have some homeschool participants, that they will go in and use, for example, the percent free lunch statistic as a way of saying this is our estimated low-income kids for the home and private school, or sorry, for the home schools. So again, yes, you can use different methods for different entities.
Okay. To just back that question up, there was another question, but I think you may have answered it. How do the districts determine if private school students are low-income kids?
Right, and again, for those cases where, say, you haven't done this before or reached agreement on how to do it for Title I, that document that I referred to, that is poverty measures, lists, I believe, 5 different potential ways of determining number of low-income kids. And the kind of guidance from the department has been that you do this in conjunction with the private entity. So whatever measure you're going to use, there should be agreement between you and the private entity that this is a legitimate way to do this. And again, you know, within the agency, the expert on equitable share is Jack O'Connor, and he's not directly involved with this on this grant, but in setting up the whole equitable share calculation and everything, I work closely with Jack. And, you know, at like Title I, if there's a private school who you can't reach agreement with, they do have the right to reach out to Jack as the state ombudsman and complain and say they don't think this is fair. And then Jack will get involved with trying to resolve it.
Okay. If it is determined that private schools have an allotment of the district's ESSER funding and that these private schools have already incurred ESSER eligible expenses on or after the March 2020 inception, I am presuming the district can reimburse the private school directly. Should the district be trying to pay private school bills directly, as is normally the case in the ESSER grants?
So again, you know, I think the process that's used in the Title I area is a good guide for this grant, for those kinds of details. You know, it is acceptable for expenditures incurred after March 13th to be, you know, allowable expenditures for this. However, you know, there is a requirement that you do not give money directly to any private school. So that causes a problem if the expenditures have already been incurred. And again, this is something that I would go back to Jack and talk to him about. But I think the answer is you have to go and pay the vendor, and then the vendor has to refund it to the private schools. The guidance seems pretty firm that no school district should ever write a check directly to a private school.
Somebody would like to confirm that if we have no homeschool children participating in title programs, we do not have to do this spreadsheet?
So I would state it a little differently. At the time the ESSER grant came out, all school districts were asked to go out and contact the private entities in their area and see if anyone wanted to participate. So if you did that and no one wanted to participate, then you don't have to do anything now. You don't have to go back and ask them again. Whatever the answer was at the time that we did this, which I think was early June, that sticks.
Okay. The last question that I have here is, but can we also use a total enrollment to calculate as well, instead of doing it by low income?
Yeah, so the clear answer to that is no. You know, when we originally set up this grant, that was the guidance that came from the department. And in the court decisions that have occurred since then, the department the court specifically said that that was an invalid way to do it, and that it had to be done according to Title I. Now, in the final guidance, the way we do this isn't exactly like Title I, but the idea that it's done on the basis of low-income kids is exactly right. You can use total enrollment for how you allocate the equitable share, but you cannot use total enrollment as the basis for doing the calculation.
Those are all the questions I have at this point. Does anyone else have a question or need a verification?
Okay,
All right,
let me
Ken?
move. Sorry.
So this is Karina Gardapi Hall, the superintendent of Browning Public Schools. So I have the consolidated title ESCA application, but I also have the single school districts, Browning Elementary and Browning High School. And so do you want me to do both of those sections?
No, Browning would do the top section, right? Because you would have the total amount of the main grant, which goes to the elementary school district. And
Okay.
then you'll also have the related services for the elementary school and then for the high school. So that's the section you would complete, Karina.
Okay, thank you.
Ken, we did get another question, and another two questions. The first question is, our high school has a private school in that the district, but not the elementary. How should we figure the calculations?
So again, if you have a consolidated school district, again, the system we're using is to use the total for the entire school district as the basis for determining the amount of equitable share. So in that sense, this is a little different than Title I.
Another question we had is, I had one homeschool reply initially that they wanted to participate in title services. When the clarification came out, I reached back out to let the homeschool that the services will be provided, but no money. They did not respond. Do I still need to include this homeschool? Do I need to do it on the spreadsheet?
So in a case like that, which is, there's always an exception to every rule. Again, I think the requirement is that you have to somehow document that this offer was made. The way we did it, when we do Title I, or when we did this in June, is to send certified letters to the recipients. And I'm not saying you have to do that, but I think you have to document that the offer was made and that there is no response. And then, as opposed to filling the spreadsheet out, just send an email to me stating that, and we'll, document that as that's the equivalent of saying that there is no equitable share.
Ken, there's been a request for you to repeat your answer to the question about submitting a budget amendment.
Sure. So if, as a result of doing this revised equitable share, the amount of equitable share changes, that after this has been sent in and approved by me, that you should revise your budget to reflect what you're going to do. There's no deadline for revising that budget. You're able to revise your budget up until the end of the grant. But certainly for doing a cash draw where the amount has changed, I would suggest that you revise your budget at the same time you do the cash draw. Likewise, what I said is that if you do this calculation and it shows that you should give out less money than the original calculation, but you've already provided the goods and services and you're not going to try to get them back, then any budget revision wouldn't reflect what's on this spreadsheet. It would reflect what the actual expenditure is going to be. But again, we need to document what the calculation is as part of the grant process.
I have no more questions in the queue, but if anyone else has some more questions about equitable share before Ken moves on to our next section.
Okay, so this just, in the last page, I had two arrows showing that, pull in the percentage from the last ESEA consolidated application, and one for how you're going to allocate things. But on this one, what the arrows represent is this is just a section of a school district's targeting step 4 page. And so what I'm showing is on the left, if you're going to be using, you're going to do the calculation using the count of low-income kids, this is the number you would fill in for the public low-income number. And then over to the right, if you're going to use the equitable share from the last, ESEA application, it's simply this number right here. So again, you would go over to the spreadsheet and enter this in as 0.0117, and it will do the calculation for you. So again, I just want to show this is specifically where this would come from that consolidated application. So I'm going to turn now to allowable expenditures. And this isn't a general review of allowable expenditures, but rather some specific things that I've been asked for and have really struggled with because of not really, really good guidance that's come from the feds. Over to the left, I put from the CARES Act that the expenditures have to be to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. Because this is typically the test that we're making for, is this an allowable expenditure? The number, the listing of all the different areas that the money can be used for and different uses is so broad that I don't think I've ever really seen a case where a requested reason to expend money goes against those allowable uses. The hard part always is this: can we say that this expenditure is used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus? So a specific thing that I've been asked about is purchasing assets with ESSER funds. And what I've always recommended, and at the time when we first came out with the grant, was to say, if you're going to purchase an asset, there's some special requirements that come with it. And it would be much better to try and see if you can do something that fits into the time period of the grant. And I think the easiest example I've used is to say, you think you need a van or a truck to help out with things. And, it would be much easier and more compliant to lease something for the period of the grant, as opposed to purchasing something that will outlive the grant. And but again, I've had people come back to me saying, yeah, but this is what we as a school district really need. And so what I'm listening here is saying, I'll approve those, and I have approved some, But you have to realize, first of all, that it's not the grant requirements, but uniform guidance for federal grants in general that you have to comply with. And two particular things to look at is, first of all, there's an area called property standards. And I list the citation there in the CFR. And it says, here's the requirements for use, maintenance, and things like you have to commit that you'll have an inventory that you maintain and things like this. But really the hardest part in my mind is the disposition. So for example, an example was a request to purchase a school bus. We need another school bus. So here you are using grant funds for a grant that lasts 2 years, and you're buying an asset that is going to last, I don't know, 20 years or something like that. So the feds have said, well, then at the end of the grant period, which is, when the use of this money is intended to stop, what do you do with this asset? And so again, what I'm saying is that if you're going to do this, I will send you something. Please read this section and agree you're going to comply with it. And it says that you can either give the asset to the federal government. You can sell the asset and give the funds to the federal government. You can use the asset for another federal program directly, or you can petition to just keep the asset. And I think that last one is the one that is what most school districts would opt to do. And there is a limit that says if the current value of the asset is under $5,000, again, at the end of the grant period, then the federal government doesn't care what you do with the asset. But if the value at that time is greater than $5,000 and you just want to keep it and continue using it, you have to petition to retain the asset. And it's a little nebulous in the way the requirement reads, that it says it needs the approval of the state or possibly the federal government in order to accomplish that. So what I've taken to doing with this is, again, getting a statement that says we want to spend the money for this asset, and here's our intent for disposition at the end. And if that disposition is to keep the asset, I send it to the grant manager for ESSER for Montana and just say, is this okay with you? And again, that, depending upon what they say, will determine what we end up, whether that's an allowable expenditure or not, if they agree with that disposition up front. And again, for one case, it was to buy part of an asset, which poses some problems, but basically then you also have to somehow record in your system that if you ever do sell this asset, whatever percentage of the money came from the federal government, you have to take that percentage, and for the funds that you receive for the disposition, give that back to the federal government.
Okay, what do you mean?
There's also procurement standards that you need to adhere to. And these shouldn't be any surprise because these are general procurement standards for use of federal funds. But in this case, particularly if you're spending a lot of money on an asset, it may get more attention during an audit than typical expenditures. So again, I've listed those. And the link that I showed down below goes to one of the many ways you can go in and look at uniform guidance.
All right.
But
Hey,
again,
you're not closed for lunch or anything, are you?
somebody needs to mute if you could, please. Somebody's on. But again, if you
That's their
determine that the
rule.
best use of the funds is
Okay,
to
I'll
purchase
come
an
in.
asset, if we go through this process together, I will approve the use of the funds for that purpose. So let me pause there on purchasing assets and see if there's any question.
And we still have a question from the previous slide that just came up. Back
Okay.
to slide 8. Do we use numbers from 2020 or 2021 on the consolidated application?
So if you're going to take the percentage from, step 4, you can use either the 2020 or the 2021 application. If you're going to do the count of low-income kids, you should take the low-income kids from the 2020 application. Because again, the starting point of the grant is supposed to be March 13th when the emergency was declared.
Ken, just to let other people know too, that we are taping this, you all saw that, so we can pull this back up again for anyone that needs it. So the next question that came in, that dealing with purchasing assets. So if we use this grant for technology like iPads and Chromebooks, et cetera, we are okay.
Yeah, because again, when I talk about purchasing assets, I'm really talking about individual items that cost more than $5,000. All of the, purchase of Google Chromebooks and that kind of stuff, I don't think there's an issue with.
What if we use the funds to modify an existing air quality system?
So what I didn't put in here is that if you're going to actually do construction, there are other requirements in uniform guidance that you have to adhere to. And rather than going through all those, because I've really only had one request to do that, I would rather just handle those on an individual basis. And again, a lot has to do with is that what's the value of the modification. But then and again, I'll just mention there's some other requirements like paying prevailing wages and a few things like that that you also have to adhere to. Okay, I'll move on. Another one that I've really struggled with, and I've had some discussions, sometimes heated discussions with people, and it's using ESSER funds for paying for existing staff. And as I was approving applications for people who would put in for staff wages, I would always go back and say, the safest thing to do is to use this money to pay for added hours, added staff, overtime. Those kinds of things are clear. But for just saying that I have, for example, a person who now spends 30% of their time dealing with coronavirus issues, but they're already a budgeted person in our system. I've always said there's some risk here of whether that's going to be an allowable expense. And part of this is, it's from the beginning, there's no supplement versus supplant requirement on ESSER. So the idea of using ESSER money to replace local funds isn't the question. What is the question is this: to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. And I've asked, again, through our grant manager for guidance on this, and I've never gotten anything back that really is acceptable. However, in discussions with various states and in a virtual conference that I attended in October, there was a person from the state grantee relations area of the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education who answered a question about this, saying, yes, it's acceptable for splitting the time of existing staff and using ESSER funds to pay that part of their salary that's related to coronavirus. And the guidance given was to document what the duty change is that's related to the coronavirus, and then have a timekeeping system to record the time actually expended on the new duties. And with that as backup, that using the ESSER funds in this way is an acceptable and allowable expenditure. So I'm passing that on to you. I still believe that of all the things that you can do with the money that come audit time, this is one of the riskiest things of being able to demonstrate this duty change is absolutely related to coronavirus. And again, this is what I've seen, and I could at least go back and say from the recording of that conference that this is what the department said, but they have never actually published this as guidance anywhere that I've been able to find.
That's only if I use the stuff on.
I think this is an important one, so let me pause there and see what questions you guys have.
We have several questions, and please, if you're not speaking, could you please mute your mics? We're getting a lot of background magic. Okay, so, and these are two questions combined, and actually a third one that I had a call about. And this is, first part is, what about emergency medical wages? Can the governor's funds be used for this? Also, what if you have to pay a premium in order to retain or hire staff?
So I want to be careful in saying in the first question, there was a question about can the governor's funds be used for this? And I'm not going to answer that question because those funds are being managed by the governor's office. And so, Nancy Hall or McCall Flynn would be the place to direct that question. I don't feel like I can speak for them. With regards to the, premium for employing someone, so the issue there, I think, is again this: how do you say that this is to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus? If you feel like you've got pretty good documentation that an auditor will say, you're right, you incurred this expense because of coronavirus, I would say yes. Again, the risk is that, a year from now, when your audit is being conducted and the auditor doesn't buy into it and says this is not an allowable expenditure, at that time you have to give the money back. So it's a little bit of risk analysis here for you. And again, the thing I'm pointing to is to say, how solid is that documentation that you can say this results from the pandemic, okay?
Let's see. The only other question that I had on the phone was just along those lines. They were putting it down as quote unquote hazard pay for teachers to come back to the school. But I think that would fit under the explanations that you just gave.
Yeah, I agree. Again, for something like that, where it's documented, we did this because of the coronavirus, it's clearly an allowable expenditure in my mind.
Oh, and we can pay emergency medical leave wages from the CARES federal funds, not just the governor's. One asked about the governor's and one asked about CARES.
I'm actually struggling with that right now. So if in terms of paying for emergency medical leave, I assume you're talking about sick time for a person who has contracted the coronavirus or has a family member that's contracted the coronavirus. And in the governor's money, there was specific guidance that said that was an acceptable expense. What I'm struggling with is what is the actual cost of that? Is there a substitute being hired? Because then I would say that that's the cost. But I'm still looking at it. I haven't made up my mind, and I'm discussing it with other staff at OPI and our attorney as well.
Yes, we are giving them extra sick leave, which has associated costs. And then along with that, the emergency sick and family leave is definitely related to and responded to the virus. There are subs being hired. There are also classified staff who are being given unbudgeted free time.
So again, the thing that I'm struggling with is the case that was presented to me is it allowable to both pay for the emergency leave and to pay for the substitute? And again, the discussion I'm having internally here is that double counting the cost of the coronavirus? So I get the suggestion that yes, both should be allowable, and I'm looking at it right now.
I have nothing in the queue.
Okay, so this is another one that's, I've seen some, for the first time, some amendments coming in of wanting to pay a bonus for extra work associated with the pandemic. And in trying to figure out, is there anything the department has said on this? In the original certification and agreement for funding, there's this item that we signed at the beginning, the state signed at the beginning of the grant. And again, as you read this, what this is kind of related to, which I hope the guidance has been clear, that first of all, to the extent that you need to keep, we're required to keep everybody employed, and to the extent that that is unusual, like I think the classic example is that if your buses aren't running, can you still pay your bus drivers? And this basically says you can, and you can use the CARES Act funds to do that, and for ESSER in particular. But there's also this last kind of strange sentence that seems to contradict itself, right? Because it says CARES Act funds generally will not be used for bonuses, merit pay, or similar expenditures, and unless related to disruptions or closures resulting from COVID-19. So I'm taking this at its face value and saying that if you have a case that you're paying some sort of bonus, merit pay, or similar expenditure, and it's directly related to the coronavirus, that that's an allowable expense. So I had and I will mention that I was discussing this with Cheryl Allen at the OPI yesterday, and she said she thought there might be some state statute about paying bonuses to teachers. And I'm not familiar with it. So again, I'm only speaking from the point of view of this being an allowable expenditure for the ESSER grant. If there's other state things that come into play, I haven't looked at those yet.
Okay, so and along with that, a question is, we are incurring payroll now. Should we pay? Shall we bill to that, or just wait till a decision is made?
So we're incurring payroll for what?
For the, I am assuming it means the extra time that somebody is gone, or paying for the sub.
So this is on the last slide, you're saying?
Yes, extra sick leave, for paying
Yeah.
for extra sick leave.
So I hope to come to grips with this week. So, please hold on for a week, okay?
There is something that maybe is more explanation. The additional cost is extending classified 80 hours of sick leave and certified 10 days, 10 days of pay on top of any substitute filling position.
So again, the specifics of this, I understand. And the fact that it's extending the normal sick leave time, I would agree, seems like it's an additional cost to the school districts. Okay, can I move on now?
Yes, make sure you shut down your, you mute your mics. I don't have the ability to mute everybody as a whole?
So a real short slide on OPI monitoring. You know, we haven't really done any of this yet, but the federal government, the Department of Education, requires, as part of giving this money to the state, that the OPI monitor the use of funds by school districts. So we're going to start a monitoring process, and it will only be desk monitoring. We won't do any visits. Again, because of the pandemic, that doesn't make any sense. And we have a form developed that we're going to use, and we'll post that on our website. But in essence, we're going to start with this, and Mindy will be involved with it. And it's kind of like other monitoring that you see for the other federal grants. It's basically a look at how you spent the money, what issues do you have, and that kind of stuff. I hope that it's not too intrusive. Again, we don't want it to be, but this is, again, something that, first of all, when we said this is how we're going to do monitoring, we don't even just get to say this is what we're going to do. We had to submit it to the Department of Education for approval. And again, their approval has been, yeah, it's okay. So we have to get going on this. So, and again, it's not that we're going to get to every school district in the next month. This is monitoring that will take place over the rest of the life of the grant.
We have developed a calendar that we will publish once we finalize this. And I think the way that we are envisioning the monitoring, we will send this out to you, and with the desk monitoring, we'll be asking for certain forms or documents and to have you send to us. We have another question, Ken, but you know, I think it's still along those same lines. Even if you have an essential worker who has to be on site full-time while others get to work from home, can we increase the pay of those that have to be on site?
So my response to this is going to be, that's not our decision to make. Each school district is going to have to make their own decision. But I would say that I think the questions that you're asking of me is not, can you do that? But if you pay the person more, can that be considered a cost related to the coronavirus? And I would say, yes, it can.
And Heather, I think that would answer your question too about your clerks. You can pay them more hourly wages because they have more work to do. They just can't, it would be hard if you documented that as bonuses and how you could provide documentation for that during audits.
So I'm not sure if you were asking me a question or if you were answering it, Mindy.
Both. So tell me if I gave the right answer.
Yeah, so again, you know, the guidance on this, like I said, in terms of how you spend the money, the allowable uses are so broad that I've never seen anyone say, I want to spend it doing this. And I'd say, well, that's not an allowable category of cost. The issue always is this, being able to say that this is a cost that is responding to, preparing for, et cetera, the coronavirus. And the strength of your documentation of that is part of what you need for defending that you appropriately spent the funds. And again, all these instances where you're coming up with this is an unusual expense that's directly related to the coronavirus, then I think you're right to be able to charge those funds. And my advice to you is to strongly document it, right? Because it's not whether I think it's acceptable or not that counts at the end. It's the day that the auditor is standing in your office and looking at your records. Okay, I'm going to move on. The last topic is annual reporting. One of the requirements of the grant is that we do quarterly reporting, but the reporting is fulfilled by reports that the OPI already files with what it does with the cash that it draws from the federal government. So that's all handled by OPI automatically. However, there's also a requirement for an annual report. Part of the difficulty is that the department has published, in other words, they put out for comment, here's the proposed reporting. And they did it, Montana filed comments, and then they have just at the beginning of November put it out again for comment, right? And allowing comments to come in through December 2nd. So it's not final yet what the annual reports are going to be. But the reporting is going to be required by the federal year, which is October 1st through September 30th of each year. And it will have to be filed by February 1st. So for the school year that we're in, excuse me, I should just say for the year that we're in now, the period would be from when the grant was first made active through September 30th.
That's pretty simple.
And so the annual report will be for that period of time. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit, but I want to note that the reporting will be by school system, and cooperatives will have to file an annual report as well.
Right.
Again, someone's talking. If you could
Yes,
mute.
somebody please mute.
You have to close it out, even though you didn't have any funds.
Ken, you have an option as the host to mute everybody's mic if you'd like to.
Right. Yeah, so I'm a little concerned that if I leave what I'm doing, I'll never find my way back again. So please, let's just continue.
Okay.
So the issues that I say that for this, first of all, it looks like the data will be reported by the OPI.
Perfect.
It won't be necessary for school districts to submit something directly to the department.
I get mine from Great Falls.
The second thing is that they are requesting that at the LEA level, so at the school district level, there is a separate reporting of how the main grant is spent and how the set-aside funds are spent.
From Associated
So to the extent that those school districts who receive a mixture of the Title I allocation and then some of the set-aside to make up a minimum of $10,000, that's something of an issue that we haven't quite figured out what exactly we want to do.
2981.
It also looks like they want us for every district to break down expenditures into 6 categories, and those categories don't match what we set up as the categories. So again, some kind of mapping or way to say, how do we, accumulate costs in those 6 categories. And then last, there's going to be some non-financial questions. And they're right here. The use of the funds to provide home internet access. The percent of, so again, when we break down this, they're going to say basically, have you used funds to provide home internet access? And maybe some little check off things of I did this, I did this, I did this. So again, not a paragraph answer, but a check off answer. Second, the percent of students who are actually using school provided equipment, right? So if you bought Chromebooks for everybody, they would like you to state how many students are using those Chromebooks out of the total population of students. They're going to ask, and again, this has been a big national question, so they decided to include this, and it's the methods used to document student participation and engagement in remote learning. And I know that, for example, as we went into Count Day this year, there was a lot of questioning from school districts about, so how do we do this for remote learning students? And again, this question isn't going to be a right or wrong. I think this is a survey to ask basically what are school districts doing. but there's some predetermined categories, and you're basically going to just be asked to check off those items that you are using for documenting students are in class and engaged. And the last is they're looking at change in total FTE in each school district. And in the form that's currently out there, they're actually asking for the total FTE in the school district from at the end of the 18 school year, the 19 school year, March 13th, and then at the end of September. Sorry, and I've been saying end of school year, but it's really at the end of the federal year. So again, stuff that I don't think we typically keep, but I hope that coming up with a legitimate estimate of this won't be too hard for school districts to do. And again, it's not the OPI that's asking for any of this. This is what the federal government is proposing that they will ask of school districts. The first time that this came out, again, Montana made comments like, please don't ask for separate reporting of the grant and the set aside. It doesn't mean anything. You know, small rural schools really don't have the staff to do this kind of stuff. Why don't you just ask for a final report from school districts that have less than 1,000 pupils? Things like that. And the response was basically an acknowledgement of the comments, but not really a change. So before we go into questions, I just want to go to this slide then and say, you know, in terms of what are the solutions to this for this annual reporting, we're looking at the use of, to see if we can just use the cash request from e-grants as a way of fulfilling the basic financial information. The problem that we have is that, again, what they're looking for is categorizations according to the purpose of the funds, rather than say the object code. And currently, when you fill out a request for cash for a grant, you don't, all you do is say which object code it's being used for, and that's how the budget is. So we don't have the purpose codes. And so I think it's possible that we're going to ask every school district to do this summary of cost by expenditure category. And expenditure, I mean purpose, as opposed to salaries or operating expenses. Obviously, we set up revenue and expenditure codes for you to use in your software for tracking these funds. And so hopefully if we do have to ask you to come up with a report for us, that it won't be too hard to do. And lastly, because they want to account for the main grant and set aside funds separately, we're considering, rather than doing something, to just assume that the percentage of main grant and set aside funds, whatever that was at the time of award, we'll just use that for the expenditures. So in that case, we would just ask you to give us the sum of the expenditures, and then when we get the data before we turn it into the department, we would separate it out into the main grant versus the set aside funds. So again, the problem with this is that it's not final. When it becomes final, we'll be right on the edge of having to do this. So again, this is going to kind of come at us pretty fast. So let me pause there, and actually I'll go to the last slide because it's appropriate. What questions do you still have based on anything that's here, but in particular for this question of doing the year-end annual report?
Ken, just let me add that Jay, myself, and Carla are putting our heads together, and we're going to be talking with the e-grants people about if we can pull this from what is already in e-grants. So that is something that we're working on right now.
Right. So any other questions? Again, very, very, as kind of a final note on this, Mindy and I are always available. If you do have questions about this grant, or what you want to do with the grant, please feel free to call me. I bet you I've fielded hundreds of calls since July for dealing with this grant, and I think that's typical for federal grant managers. And there's certainly no problem on my end with answering any questions, taking any call, etc.
Ken, we do have two more questions. The first is, I heard no school district should write a check to a private school. How should that money be dispersed, and what kinds of documentation is required?
So again, this goes back to, I think, Title I, and there's no difference here. The federal government says that for this equitable share, you can't give money to a private school district. What you can do is, when you agree on what goods or services that you will provide, or that will be provided as part of the equitable share, you actually buy the goods and ship them to the private school, or arrange for the services and pay the vendor directly, all those options. And in terms of documentation, when you come to an agreement with the private school about what you're going to provide, the documentation, I think, is an email or something to that effect that kind of recaps, well, we've agreed this is what equitable share is going to be for this grant. And at that point, then you would actually have to go ahead and arrange for those services or goods and expend the money. I've certainly seen cases where a private school, for example, has said, well, we're really, arranging for this service. And then they arrange for the vendor to charge the public school directly and get paid directly. Because again, it's clear in Title I and regulations for this that you should never disperse funds directly to a private school or private entity.
There's two more questions, but the second question is a follow-up to the one you just answered. Why does the school district have to incur the additional costs of purchasing, et cetera, with a private school?
Because it's the law, I think, is the simplest answer I can give you. This is the regulation for Title I funds.
Okay. And did we have a request to repeat the guidance on providing home internet? Somebody was talking over, and that they need to link the revenue to the expenditure codes.
So again, we gave guidance for a school district, when you receive these funds, when the funds are dispersed to you, record it using this reporter code, I think it is. And when you expend the funds, use this reporting code. Renee Richter, are you here? Or am I missing something on this?
Nope, I'm here.
So do you have anything to add to this answer?
Can I get the question repeated?
Why does the school district have to incur the additional costs?
No.
The next
no,
one. Sorry,
maybe
providing home
repeat
internet.
the guidance on providing home internet, need linked to revenue expenditure codes specific to these funds.
I'm not sure I understand the question. We have specific revenue and program codes set up for the different coronavirus funds that are available. I guess they can contact me directly if they have need some clarification on what coding they're talking about. I'm always available at OPI for coding questions for the different funds of these coronavirus funds. Does that answer the question, or is she looking for something more specific? But yes, you should always track these with the project reporter code also.
Diana, does that answer your question?
Right, and I see that Denise Williams also posted in the chat box a link to to a guide, and I know that the codes themselves are posted on our website where I showed before. There's a link to that. So that's readily available, and Renee's available if you have questions. I see also one that maybe we didn't get to up above. I'm saying, Ken, you're saying the first annual reporting for this grant might be in February 2021 and covering the period from inception through September 2020. Yes, that's exactly correct. And again, I don't think it's might be. The first round of annual reporting will be due on February 1st.
Ken, what is our normal procedure for posting the link to this webinar and the slides?
So at the same, the slides, this PowerPoint that I had, I'm going to post at the same page that I showed you before where we have the other guidance. And that should be up either today or tomorrow. For posting the recording, I'll be honest with you, I always get confused by that. But I'll try to make sure that we get that posted and have it so that it's readily available for people to find.
And if you cannot find it, just go ahead and contact me. And I will show you where it's at. I will tell you where it's at.
And thank you, Denise, for posting that.
Mm-hmm.
Any final comments or questions from anyone? We're actually on time. How about that? Well, I want to thank everyone for participating today. And please, again, if you run into colleagues, et cetera, who might benefit from this, we'll have this posted on the website so that anyone can look at it. And thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.